we first reported last week, a recent story in Canada says that no human remains have been found at 14 alleged burial sites of Indigenous children. Starting back in 2021, stories emerged of the existence of supposed mass graves of students at residential schools, some of which were run by the Catholic Church. And we go now to Archbishop Richard Gagnon, the head of the Archdiocese of Winnipeg, Manitoba, where some of the residential schools were located. Your Excellency, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it. Curious, what was your initial reaction when the story first surfaced about the mass graves, and now that it turns out so far no human remains have been found at the 14 suspected mass burial sites?
Well, I think in this particular case, these 14, as they call them, anomalies, were detected by ground-penetrating radar. And previous to that, there were a number of stories over the years passed around by people in the community that there were grave sites under the church. And so that's where these 14 anomalies were determined. And as far as the diocese is concerned, we were prepared for any result whatsoever in terms of this process. And so we embarked upon this, and a very careful professional investigation was undertaken. And the results were negative in terms of any human remains. So, I mean, it's always good to have that kind of result, but certainly we were as curious as anybody about these possibilities under the church. It's a very large church, and the basement area is dirt, and so, you know, we were prepared for any particular result that may come from this process.
Yeah, and how is the story, how is it being covered in Canada, if at all? Is it drawing any attention?
I think initially when we began the process of this excavation, we began with an early morning pipe ceremony led by the indigenous community up there. There was a lot of national attention paid to that. But at the end of the 4-week period of excavation, the national news was not quite as prevalent. Some of the networks reported the results, and others didn't play it up very big at all. So it began with a much more national notice than the way it ended.
And as we know, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, he spoke out quite strongly about the initial reports about the mass graves. But what about now? Has he said anything about these new findings?
I'm not sure whether or not the Prime Minister made any comment on our particular case. When you're speaking of mass graves, there's no mass graves in Canada. This has been downplayed by the Indigenous people themselves. What you have had over the past couple of years has been the use of ground-penetrating radar uncovering unmarked graves. There's no mass graves. Nobody's alleging that in Canada. So it's a matter of unmarked graves in communities where there were residential schools. And so in this particular case in Manitoba, where this excavation occurred, I'm not aware of any comment from the federal government about this particular case.
What about the faithful? Have they responded to these new developments?
I have not had a lot of reply from people. I think in general it's safe to say that people are very supportive of the bishops in general, who are in favor of any kind of professional investigation into these findings. But all of that is contingent upon the support of the Indigenous community itself. And the good news here is that the Archdiocese of Winnipeg entered into a cooperative venture, a good communication and agreement with the Pine Creek Reserve in partnership with the RCMP to embark upon this project. So it's a good example of what can be done when there is openness and good communication, and try to determine the historical record of this question.
Well, Your Excellency, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us about all of this. We're going to continue to follow it. We really appreciate it. God bless you.
My pleasure. Thank you.